A little girl says to the billionaire, "Sir, my grandmother has a birthmark just like yours." Snow fell silently on Mason Street, coating the worn sign of Margaret's Bakery in a delicate white blanket. Inside, the aroma of fresh bread mingled with the warmth of hope and regret that had sustained Margaret through 35 winters of waiting. Through the frosted window, she watched a familiar figure in an expensive coat pause before her shop, a billionaire whose face she'd seen in countless magazines, whose birthmark she'd traced on a newborn's wrist decades ago. Before she could move, her granddaughter Emma's voice pierced the silence. "Look, he has the same star on his hand as you, Grandma." Before we dive into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. If this is your first time discovering the channel or you haven't subscribed yet, please support us by clicking the subscribe button. It truly means a lot to us. Thank you so much. Alexander Hayes stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching snowflakes dance against the Manhattan skyline. At 42, he had everything money could buy, yet the emptiness inside him grew deeper with each passing year. The Forbes magazine on his desk declared him America's most eligible billionaire, but the headline only served to remind him of his solitude. His phone buzzed. Another crisis at Hayes International. The Children's Hospital project, his attempt at corporate redemption, was facing fierce opposition from the board. "We're a real estate company, not a charity," they'd argued. But Alexander saw something in those hospital plans that his board couldn't understand: a chance to create the home he never had. Running his fingers over the star-shaped birthmark on his wrist, a habit he'd developed during moments of stress, Alexander recalled his last conversation with his adoptive father. "You're throwing away millions on a pediatric wing because of your own abandonment issues," the elder Hayes had said, his words cutting deep. "Sometimes I wonder if we made a mistake taking you in." The adoption papers in his safe told a sterile story: baby boy, born December 24th, mother's consent given, father unknown. His adoptive parents, the prestigious Hayes family, had given him everything except answers. They'd raised him to be their perfect heir, but perfection came with a price. Every achievement, every milestone was measured against the unspoken question: was he worthy of the Hayes name? His office door opened, and Grace, his assistant of 15 years, entered with her usual quiet efficiency. "Mr. Hayes, the board is waiting," she paused, noting his distant expression. "And sir, the snow is getting worse? They're saying it's going to be the coldest winter in 30 years. Alexander nodded, straightening his tie. In the reflection of the window, he saw what everyone else saw: the powerful CEO, the ruthless negotiator, the man who turned struggling properties into gold. But beneath the tailored suit and carefully cultivated image lay a truth he'd never admitted: every building he bought, every property he transformed, was really just another attempt to build a home he could belong in. The boardroom fell silent as he entered. 12 faces, all wearing expressions of careful concern, watched him take his seat. Thomas Reed, his adoptive father's oldest friend, and now his biggest critic on the board, spoke first. "Alexander, we've reviewed the hospital proposal again. The numbers don't work. We're not in the business of losing money." "Children shouldn't die because their parents can't afford treatment," Alexander replied, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken personal pain. "Hayes International can afford to put people before profit, just this once." "This is exactly why your father worried about you taking over," Thomas said, his words deliberately cruel. "You let your emotions cloud your judgment. Maybe it's those mysterious genes of yours." The room temperature seemed to drop. Alexander's grip on his pen tightened, the star-shaped birthmark visible beneath his cuff. Every success, every billion added to his net worth, had been an attempt to prove them wrong, to show that his unknown origins didn't define him. Yet here he was, still fighting the same battle. His phone buzzed again, a message from the private investigator he'd hired years ago to find his birth parents. Like all the others, it led nowhere. Some part of him wondered if this was his punishment for success, to have everything except the one thing he truly wanted to know: where he came from. The hospital project moves forward, he announced, his tone leaving no room for argument. And I'm personally guaranteeing any losses for the first 5 years, he stood, buttoning his jacket. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a property to inspect in Millbrook. In this weather, Grace asked as he strode past her desk moments later. The forecast looks terrible. Alexander grabbed his coat, the same determination in his eyes that had built his empire. Sometimes, Grace, the worst weather brings the most unexpected blessings. He didn't know why he said it. He'd never been one for sentimentality. But something about the swirling snow and the weight of the board's judgment made him feel like he was standing on the edge of something important. As his driver navigated through the increasingly heavy snow, Alexander stared at his birthmark, thinking about the small town ahead and the struggling property he was supposed to evaluate. He had no way of knowing that in a few hours, a little girl's innocent observation would shatter the carefully constructed world he'd built, forcing him to confront the question he'd been running from his entire life: who was he really? And what was he willing to sacrifice to find out? The old oven timer chimed at Margaret's bakery, its familiar ring barely audible over howling winter wind. Margaret Wilson pulled out another batch of her signature cinnamon rolls, the same recipe she'd perfected during 35 years of early mornings and late nights. At 62, her hands bore the scars of countless burns and the wrinkles of time, but they never trembled except when she touched the star-shaped birthmark on her wrist. "Grandma, can I decorate these ones?" Emma called from the counter, her small face dusted with flour. At 7, she was already showing signs of inheriting Margaret's talent for baking, though she hadn't inherited her blood. The thought made Margaret's chest tighten with a familiar ache. "Of course, sweetheart," Margaret smiled, hiding the wave of dizziness that had become more frequent lately. The doctor's words from last week echoed in her mind. 6 months, maybe less without treatment. But the treatment cost more than her little bakery could ever generate, and she'd sworn never to burden anyone with her problems, especially not now. Behind the register sat a wooden box containing 35 Christmas cards, one written every year on December 24th, each addressed to a son she'd never gotten to know. "My dearest Alexander," they all began, before pouring out a mother's love, regret, and desperate explanations. None had ever been sent. Mrs. Wilson Sarah, her only employee, appeared from the storage room. The bank called again about the mortgage. Margaret nodded, her face maintaining its gentle expression despite the worry gnawing at her heart. The bakery was 3 months behind on payments, and the new corporate development threatening the town wasn't helping. But this place was more than just a business. It was her redemption, her way of creating the home she'd been forced to deny her son. "The snow's getting worse," Sarah noted, peering through the frosted windows. "They say it'll be the coldest winter since," she trailed off, catching herself. "Since the winter I gave him up," Margaret finished quietly. That brutal December when she'd been a young nurse, barely 20, with dreams of helping others. Until the politician's son had noticed her, until his powerful family had discovered her pregnancy, until they'd given her an impossible choice: give up the baby or watch them destroy not just her career, but any chance of her child having a normal life. Emma skipped over, oblivious to the heavy memories hanging in the air. "Grandma, remember what you always say about snow angels?" Her small hand reached up to touch Margaret's star-shaped birthmark, "that they bring lost people home." Margaret's heart clenched. Emma didn't know she wasn't her biological granddaughter, didn't know that her real mother had been Margaret's patient, a young single mom who died in Margaret's care because she couldn't afford proper treatment. Taking in Emma had been Margaret's way of atoning, of ensuring no more children would be separated from those who loved them. The bell above the door chimed as Mrs. Henderson, the town gossip, bustled in from the cold. "Did you hear?" she asked, not bothering with a greeting. "Hayes International is buying up properties all over town. They say the CEO himself is coming to inspect them today." Margaret froze, the name Hayes sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the winter chill. She'd seen his face in newspapers, watched from afar as he built his empire. The same determined chin, the same intense eyes she remembered holding for just a moment before they took him away. The medical bills in her desk drawer seemed to grow heavier. 6 months, maybe less. Not enough time to make things right, to explain why she'd signed those papers to tell him about the politician father who'd threatened to ruin them both if she kept him. Not enough time to share the story of his birth on Christmas Eve, during the worst snowstorm in memory, when the stars had aligned in the shape of the matching birthmarks they shared. Grandma Emma's voice pulled her back to the present. "You're doing it again," looking at the old cards. Margaret quickly closed the wooden box, forcing a smile, just remembering, sweetheart. "Now, how about we make those special Christmas cookies? The ones with the star shapes?" As Emma happily gathered ingredients, Margaret checked her reflection in the storefront window, adjusting her scarf to hide the fatigue in her face. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in that swirling white, a car was bringing her son back to her. Millbrook sat nestled between snow-covered hills like a scene from a forgotten Christmas card, its Victorian storefronts draped in holiday garlands that had seen better days. Main Street's lamp-posts wore wreaths whose red bows battled against the gathering storm, while the town square's ancient fountain had frozen into a sculpture of ice, its pennies trapped beneath like wishes frozen in time. The evening news blared from the television at Joe's Diner, where locals huddled over coffee and concern. Hayes International continues its aggressive expansion into small-town America, the anchor announced, as weather warnings scrolled beneath. The diner's windows rattled with another blast of Arctic wind, but the real chill came from the conversations within. "Did you hear they're targeting Margaret's bakery?" Martha Chen, the high school principal, asked the group. 35 years of memories gone because some city billionaire needs another tax write-off. Her words carried the weight of someone who remembered when Margaret first arrived young, alone and carrying secrets as heavy as the snow outside. Mayor Thompson cleared his throat, his expression grave. "Times change, folks. We can't stop progress," but his eyes betrayed him as they drifted toward the bakery across the square, where Emma's small figure could be seen decorating cookies in the window. The town had watched her grow since the tragedy 3 years ago, when Margaret had taken in the orphaned child despite her own struggles. Progress Tom Baker, whose family had owned the hardware store for generations, spat the word like a curse. "Is that what we're calling it when some corporate vulture swoops in during the worst winter in decades, when half the town's already struggling to keep their lights on?" The diner fell silent as Grace Lewis, Margaret's oldest friend and the town's retired nurse, spoke up. "Margaret won't sell. Not the bakery. It's all she has left of." She stopped, the unfinished sentence hanging in the air like the icicles outside. Everyone knew the stories, whispers of a baby given up, of powerful families and impossible choices, of a young nurse whose career ended the same winter her child disappeared. Through the diner's frosted windows, Christmas lights twinkled bravely against the gathering darkness. The town's massive spruce tree, standing sentinel in the square since before anyone could remember, swayed under the weight of fresh snow. Beneath it, volunteers from the local church set up the annual nativity scene, their movements careful on the ice-slick ground. "You know what they say about this weather?" old Mr. Jenkins mused from his corner booth, where he'd held court for the past 30 years. "Last time we had a storm like this was the night Margaret's boy was born. Strange things happen when the stars align like that." The younger folks rolled their eyes at the old man's superstitions, but the long-time residents exchanged knowing glances. They remembered that Christmas Eve, the power out across town, the hospital generator failing, the strange light in the sky that some swore formed a perfect star before the snow swallowed it whole. Sarah, Margaret's young employee, burst through the diner's door in a swirl of snowflakes. "They're saying Hayes himself is coming today." His car was spotted on the highway. She shook snow from her coat, her cheeks flushed with more than just cold. But that's not all you know that birthmark Margaret has. The star-shaped one. The diner patrons leaned in, steam rising from forgotten coffee cups. They all knew the mark, had seen it peek out from beneath Margaret's sleeve as she handed over fresh bread and kind words. Some said it was a sign, though of what no one could agree. "Well," Sarah continued, lowering her voice, "I was looking at a magazine article about Hayes International, and there was this photo of him at some charity event. He has the exact same mark in the exact same place." A heavy silence fell over the diner, broken only by the howl of wind and the distant sound of carols from the church choir practicing for Christmas Eve service. The townspeople exchanged glances heavy with unspoken thoughts, years of protected secrets threatening to surface like spring ice breaking on the river. Outside, the storm intensified, turning Main Street into a swirling canvas of white. The old town clock, its face barely visible through the snow, ticked steadily toward a moment 35 years in the making. In its shadow, two worlds were about to collide: the glittering realm of Alexander Hayes and the warm, wounded heart of Margaret's Millbrook. And in the bakery window, little Emma continued to decorate her cookies with stars, unaware that she was about to become the catalyst for a story of loss, love, and redemption that would change not just her family, but the entire town forever. The black Mercedes struggled through Millbrook's snow-covered streets, its sleek design ill-suited for small-town winter. Inside, Alexander checked his phone one last time before losing signal. Property valuations, zoning laws, and development plans filled his screen, cold numbers that would determine the fate of colder buildings. The storm had worsened, turning what should have been a quick inspection into a treacherous journey. So his driver called back. "I don't think we can make it up to the development site in this weather. Should we wait it out somewhere?" Alexander glanced out the window, his eyes catching the warm glow of a bakery. Something about it made him pause, perhaps the contrast between its humble storefront and the luxury developments he usually surveyed. "Pull over there," he ordered, surprising himself. As he stepped out into the swirling snow, the scent of fresh baked bread hit him with unexpected force. It stirred something deep in his memory, a phantom comfort he couldn't quite place. Brushing snow from his Armani coat, he found himself drawn to the window display where Christmas cookies formed intricate patterns of stars. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered, bringing warmth and the sound of a child's laughter. He stood for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the gentle light. An elderly woman behind the counter looked up, then froze, her face draining of color, as if she'd seen a ghost. "Excuse me, sir," a small voice interrupted his observations. He looked down to find a little girl, no more than 7, staring up at him with curious eyes. There was something disarmingly direct about her gaze, something that made his carefully constructed walls waver. "Yes," he replied, his businessman's voice softening despite himself. "Your hand," she said, pointing to where his sleeve had risen slightly. "You have a star, just like my grandma's." Time seemed to stop. Alexander's eyes followed the child's finger to his birthmark, the one feature his adoptive parents couldn't explain away, the one thing that had marked him as different since birth. His gaze snapped to the elderly woman who had gripped the counter for support, her sleeve sliding back to reveal an identical mark. "Emma," the woman whispered, her voice trembling, "would you please go check on the cookies in the back?" But Emma wasn't finished. "Grandma always says it's magic," she continued, oblivious to the tension building in the room, "that the stars align when lost people are supposed to find their way home." Alexander couldn't move. The world had narrowed to that single point of connection, a star-shaped birthmark that had haunted his dreams, now mirrored on another's wrist. 35 years of questions crystallized in this moment, in this humble bakery, with snow falling like tears outside. "I'm Margaret Wilson," the woman finally said, her voice carrying decades of carefully contained emotion. "And I think I've been waiting for you for a very long time." Alexander's throat tightened. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla suddenly felt overwhelming, as if it were trying to tell him something his mind couldn't grasp. The birthmark he managed, his usual eloquence deserting him. How? You were born during a snowstorm, Margaret said softly, each word weighted with memory. On Christmas Eve. The hospital had lost power, and the only light came from the stars. When they first placed you in my arms, I saw we shared the same mark, and I knew. She stopped, tears threatening to spill. Alexander stood frozen, his world tilting on its axis. The property papers in his briefcase, the board meeting, the empire he'd built, all of it seemed to fade against the reality of this moment. Emma's voice floated from the back, singing Christmas carols as she arranged cookies, her innocence a stark contrast to the heavy truth settling in the room. Outside, the storm intensified, as if nature itself were conspiring to keep them in this moment of recognition. I don't understand, Alexander said, his voice hoarse. But he did understand. Deep in his bones, in the place where his earliest memory should have been, something was shifting, awakening. Margaret reached beneath the counter and pulled out a wooden box. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing stacks of Christmas cards, each marked with a date. I wrote to you, she whispered. Every year, on the day you were born. I never sent them, but I needed you to exist somewhere outside my heart. The first card was dated December 24th, 35 years ago. Alexander stared at it, his carefully ordered world crumbling like the snowflakes outside. He had come to Millbrook to acquire property, to expand his empire. Instead, he found himself standing on the precipice of a truth that would change everything. The silence in Margaret's bakery hung thick as fresh snow, broken only by the distant sound of Emma's cheerful humming. Alexander's hands trembled as he picked up the first card, his billion-dollar empire suddenly feeling meaningless against the weight of this yellowed envelope. Why the question escaped him, barely a whisper, carrying 35 years of emptiness. His fingers traced over the carefully written address to my dearest Alexander in handwriting that somehow felt familiar, as if his soul remembered what his mind could not. Margaret's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. There are things you need to know, she began, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. Choices that were made for us, not by us. But first she stopped as another wave of dizziness hit her, gripping the counter to stay upright. Alexander instinctively moved to help her, then froze, caught between a lifetime of practiced detachment and a sudden, overwhelming urge to protect. The corporate raider who had dissolved entire companies without hesitation now found himself paralyzed by an old woman's distress. I'm fine, Margaret insisted, though her pallor suggested otherwise. Just the excitement of she gestured vaguely between them, at the impossible reality of this moment. Grandma makes the best hot chocolate when people are sad, Emma announced, suddenly reappearing. She looked between the two adults, her young face showing wisdom beyond her years. And you both look really sad. Alexander almost laughed at the absurdity of billionaire being offered hot chocolate by a child in a bakery he'd planned to demolish, but something in Emma's innocent observation cut through his defenses. He was sad. He'd been sad for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like not to be. Emma, sweetheart, Margaret began, but the little girl was already pulling out mugs, her movements showing the confidence of someone who knew this kitchen as well as she knew her own heart. The marshmallows are important, she explained seriously to Alexander. They're like little hugs floating in your cup. The simple childhood wisdom hit him like a physical blow. How many winter evenings had he spent in his penthouse, surrounded by luxury, but devoid of such simple comforts? How many times had he wished for someone to tell him why he had a star on his wrist, why he felt empty despite his success? I should go, he said suddenly, his corporate instinct screaming for retreat, for control. This is too much. He turned toward the door, but Emma's small voice stopped him. But the stars aligned, she protested, genuine distress in her tone. Grandma always says that's important, and you haven't even tried the hot chocolate yet. Margaret watched the interaction with a mixture of hope and heartbreak. She's right about the stars, she said softly. The night you were born, There was a formation in the sky exactly like our birthmark. The nurses called it a miracle. Alexander's hand went to his wrist, a lifetime habit now charged with new meaning. "My adoption records," he said, his voice rough. "They said my mother signed me away willingly, that she didn't want." No, the force of Margaret's rejection echoed through the bakery. Never that. Never willingly, her composure cracked, decades of pain bleeding through. "They told me you'd have a better life, that your fate, that certain people would ensure you'd never want for anything. They said if I tried to keep you." She trailed off as the bell above the door chimed again. Sarah, her young employee, burst in with snow in her hair and worry on her face. "Mrs. Wilson?" The bank manager called again. He says she stopped short, recognizing Alexander from magazine covers and news reports. The spell broke. Reality crashed back in. He was Alexander Hayes, CEO of Hayes International, here to evaluate property acquisition. She was Margaret Wilson, owner of a failing bakery, keeper of secrets that could destroy carefully constructed lives. Emma, oblivious to the undercurrents, proudly presented 2 mugs of hot chocolate, topped with precise arrangements of marshmallows. "See," she said, pointing to the way they'd melted slightly. "Little hugs." Alexander stared at the mug, at this offering of unconditional kindness. In the window's reflection, he caught sight of himself, the powerful executive rendered vulnerable by a child's simple gesture and a mother's unspoken love. "The storm's getting worse," Sarah reported nervously. "They're saying roads might close soon." Margaret straightened, years of practice helping her mask her emotions. "You should go," she told Alexander, though every word seemed to cause her pain, "before the weather traps you here." But Emma had other ideas. "You can't leave," she insisted. "You just found each other. And look, the marshmallows made perfect stars in your chocolate. That's a sign." Alexander looked down at his mug, where indeed the marshmallows had melted into a familiar star pattern. Outside, the snow swirled harder, as if nature itself were conspiring to keep him in this moment of truth. "Maybe," he said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that would change everything, "maybe being trapped here is exactly what needs to happen." Back in his hotel room that evening, Alexander paced like a caged lion. The storm had indeed trapped him in Millbrook, but his mind was trapped elsewhere in a small bakery with matching birthmarks and unsent letters. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from the board, from his adoptive family, from Grace about the children's hospital project. He ignored them all. Instead, he found himself dialing a different number. "Davidson," he said when his head of security answered. "I need everything you can find on Margaret Wilson. Current residence Millbrook, former occupation nurse. Focus on the years around 1989, particularly December." He pulled out his laptop, the glow illuminating his troubled face as he began his own search. Margaret Wilson's bakery was drowning in debt, mortgages, loans, and most recently, mounting medical bills. His cursor hovered over the foreclosure notices. With one call, he could save her business. With another, he could destroy it. Sir Davidson's voice crackled through the phone an hour later. "You might want to sit down for this." Alexander's grip tightened on his phone as Davidson continued. Margaret Wilson was a promising young nurse at St. Mary's Hospital in 1989. She disappeared from their records suddenly that December. But here's where it gets interesting. There was a major donor to the hospital that year, Senator James Sterling. The name hit Alexander like a physical blow. Sterling Industries was one of his biggest competitors, headed by the senator's son, Richard Sterling, the same man who had tried to block his children's hospital project. "The timing matches your birth records," Davidson added carefully. "And sir, there's more. The night you were born, there was a power outage at the hospital. The only records from that night are handwritten. Most were destroyed in a convenient fire, but I found one surviving note in an old nurse's diary. It mentions a young nurse giving birth during the blackout. And a threatening visit from the Sterling family lawyer." Alexander's mind raced. The pieces were falling into place: a powerful family, a forced adoption, a career destroyed. But why? What were they hiding? His laptop pinged with an incoming email from Davidson. Hospital records, newspaper clippings, and a photograph. His hands shook as he opened it. A young Margaret in her nurse's uniform, standing beside a younger Richard Sterling at a hospital fundraiser. Her smile was bright, innocent. His expression was possessive. Another ping. This time medical records, recent ones. Margaret's records. Terminal cancer, Davidson reported grimly. 6 months without treatment. The experimental therapy that could help her exists, but it's exclusive to one hospital owned by Sterling Industries. Alexander felt the rage building inside him, cold and precise. Richard Sterling had known. All these years, through every business deal, every negotiation, his biological father had known exactly who he was. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Opening it, he found Emma standing there in her winter coat, clutching a small box of cookies. "How did you?" he began. "I followed your footprints in the snow," she said simply. "Grandma's crying in the kitchen. She thinks you're mad at her." "Are you?" The directness of her question disarmed him. "No," he answered truthfully. "I'm mad at other people." Emma nodded sagely. "Because they made her give you away at his startled look," she continued. "I heard her talking to Grace about it. She said bad people threatened to hurt you if she kept you." Alexander invited her in, watching as she carefully arranged star-shaped cookies on the hotel desk. "Emma, how do you know all this?" She shrugged, her small face serious. "I'm good at listening. And I know about being given away too. My mom died in Grandma's hospital because rich people wouldn't help her. That's why Grandma took me in. She says sometimes love means finding new ways to be a family." The revelation struck him hard. Margaret had taken in this child despite her own struggles because of another wealthy family's indifference, just like she had been forced to give up her own son because of their cruelty. His phone buzzed again, Davidson, with more information. A complex web of power, money, and secrets spanning decades. The truth was there, waiting to be exposed. But at what cost? Emma's voice broke through his thoughts. "The cookies are a peace offering," she explained. "Grandma says those always help when hearts are hurting." Alexander looked at the star-shaped cookies, then at his birthmark, then at the damning evidence on his laptop. 3 paths lay before him: walk away and protect his empire, expose the truth and risk everything, or find another way, a way that might heal more than just his own wounds. He picked up his phone one last time. "Davidson," he said, his voice carrying the same determination that had built his fortune. "Forget the investigation. I need you to look into something else, everything you can find about experimental cancer treatments, and any dirt you can dig up on Sterling Industries' medical patents." The storm outside grew stronger, but Alexander Hayes had finally found his true north. If this story touched your heart, consider becoming part of our storytelling family. Every subscription helps us create more emotional tales that explore love, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds between parents and children. Join us in celebrating the power of family, hope, and second chances. Subscribe, and let's share more heartwarming journeys together. The first light of dawn found Alexander in Margaret's bakery hours before opening time. The snow had finally stopped, leaving the town in pristine silence. Through the window, the frozen fountain reflected the emerging sunlight, like 1,000 scattered stars. "The letters," he said quietly to Margaret, who sat across from him at a small table. "I want to read them all." Margaret pushed the wooden box toward him, her hands trembling slightly. 35 letters, one for every Christmas Eve since she couldn't finish the sentence. Instead, she rose to check the ovens, giving him privacy with decades of unspoken words. The first letter nearly broke him. "My dearest Alexander, tonight, as snow blankets the world outside, you are exactly 1 hour old. They haven't taken you yet. You're sleeping in my arms, your tiny hand wrapped around my finger, our matching birthmarks aligned. The lawyer comes at dawn. They say I'll give you a better life by letting you go. But how can any life be better than one filled with love? Your mother for these few precious hours. Margaret. Alexander's throat tightened. Each subsequent letter told the story of a mother's enduring love, of birthdays imagined but never celebrated, of achievements unknown but deeply felt. But it was the letter from December 1990 that made his hands shake. My darling boy. Today I saw Richard Sterling on television, announcing his engagement. He smiled at the cameras like he hadn't destroyed us both the year before. Like he hadn't threatened to ensure you'd never be adopted if I kept you. Like he hadn't used his father's influence to blacklist me from every hospital when I initially refused to give you up. I wonder if he sees you, his secret son, in the society papers. Does he recognize himself in your features? Does he feel any remorse? I pray you're loved, wherever you are. Mom. Richard Sterling, Alexander said, his voice dangerously quiet. He's my father. Margaret turned from the ovens, her face pale. He was a resident at the hospital where I worked. Young, charming, from a powerful family. When I told him I was pregnant, she steadied herself against the counter. His father was running for Senate. A scandal would have ruined everything. They gave me a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. The adoption papers said Father Unknown Alexander's words carried years of confusion because they made it disappear. All of it. The records, the witnesses, my entire career. Margaret's voice shook. When I threatened to tell the truth, they showed me files on every adoption agency in the country. One word they said, and your baby will spend his life in the system. Alexander stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The ruthless businessman in him admired the calculated cruelty. The abandoned child in him wanted to scream. I saw him last month, he said, pacing the small bakery. Richard Sterling. We were bidding on the same property, the land for my children's hospital project. He looked me in the eye and called me son as a joke. His laugh was bitter. He knew. All this time, through every deal, every negotiation, he knew exactly who I was. Alexander. Margaret's voice was gentle. There's something else you need to know. She hesitated, then continued. I'm sick. Cancer. The treatment I need. It's experimental, exclusive to Sterling Medical Research. The irony was like acid in his veins. His biological father controlled the treatment that could save his mother's life. The bell above the door chimed. Emma bounded in, covered in snow, her face glowing. I made a snow angel, she announced proudly. Then, seeing their expressions, she stopped. Are you telling him about the bad man? Both adults stared at her. The one in the fancy car who came to see you last week, Emma continued innocently. The one who said you had to sell the bakery or he'd tell everyone your secrets. Margaret's face drained of color. Emma, go check on the cookies in the back, please. But Alexander knelt to the child's level. What man, Emma? What did he look like? Old, gray hair. He had a star pin on his coat, like your birthmark. He made Grandma cry. Senator Sterling, Margaret whispered. Richard's father. He's always watched me, making sure I kept my silence. Alexander stood, something cold and determined settling in his chest. For 35 years, the Sterlings had orchestrated their lives, wielding power and money like weapons. They'd forced a mother to give up her child, threatened an innocent baby's future, and were now using a dying woman's illness as leverage. His phone buzzed a message from Davidson. Sir, you need to see this. Found proof of Sterling Industries stealing medical patents. Their entire research division is built on fraud. Alexander looked at Margaret, at the strength in her eyes despite everything. At Emma, who'd lost her mother because of wealthy men's indifference, at the stack of letters chronicling a love that refused to die. "They won't hurt us anymore," he promised, his voice carrying the weight of a vow. "Any of us." The Hayes family mansion loomed before Alexander like an ice fortress, its manicured grounds now buried under pristine snow. He hadn't planned on coming here, but his adoptive father's message had been clear: "You're making a terrible mistake. Come home immediately." The grand doors opened to reveal Elizabeth Hayes, his adoptive mother, perfectly coiffed despite the early hour. "Darling," she said, air kissing his cheek, "you look terrible. Have you been sleeping in that suit?" "Where's father?" Alexander asked, following her into the study where he'd spent countless hours learning to be a Hayes proper, controlled, ambitious. Right here, Richard Hayes SR stood by the fireplace, holding a tablet displaying the morning's headlines: Hayes International CEO halts, Sterling Industries merger sources cite personal vendetta. "Sit down," his father commanded. When Alexander remained standing, he continued, "Do you have any idea what you've done? The Sterling merger was worth billions. The board is in chaos." "The board will survive," Alexander replied coolly, "though they might be interested to know why you've been pushing so hard for this merger. Private interests in Sterling Industries, perhaps." His father's face tightened. "You've been digging." "I've been finding truth." Alexander pulled out his phone, displaying emails between his adoptive father and Senator Sterling from 35 years ago. "You knew, didn't you? When you adopted me, you knew exactly whose son I was." Elizabeth gasped softly, sinking into a chair. Richard S.R.'s expression hardened. "We gave you everything, made you everything you are." "You made me a weapon," Alexander corrected. "Raised me to compete against my own father's company. Was that the plan all along? Create the perfect revenge against Richard Sterling by using his own son?" "We gave you opportunities that woman never could have." Elizabeth burst out. "A proper education, connections, the future." "That woman," Alexander's voice cut like ice, "has spent 35 years writing me letters she never sent. She took in an orphan child despite barely making ends meet. She's dying because the treatment she needs is controlled by the same people who forced her to give up her baby." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, snow began to fall again, as if nature itself were trying to soften the harsh truths being revealed. "The board meeting is in 2 hours," Richard Cesar finally said. "End this nonsense. Sign the merger papers, or I'll ensure you lose everything: your position, your reputation, your legacy." Alexander laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "My legacy? An empire built on other people's pain? I've seen the files, father. Your partnership with the Sterlings goes beyond business. You helped them bury their secrets, including me." "We protected you," Elizabeth protested. "From scandal, from shame." "No," Alexander's voice softened with realization. "You protected yourselves, your perfect image, your social standing." He turned to leave, then paused. "The Children's Hospital project you tried so hard to stop. It's being built on Sterling Industries' land, and their experimental cancer treatment. It's about to become public access." "You'll destroy everything," his father warned. "The company, this family." "This was never a family." Alexander's words fell like snow, soft but cold. "It was a business arrangement, and I'm renegotiating the terms." His phone buzzed a message from Emma. "Grandma's making star cookies again. She says they're magic because they're made with love. Are you coming home soon?" Home. Such a simple word, yet it had never felt right in this mansion. But in a small bakery, with the scent of cinnamon and the sound of a child's laughter. "Alexander," Elizabeth called as he reached the door, her voice suddenly vulnerable. "We did love you. In our way." He turned back one last time. "Love doesn't come with conditions, or contracts, or threats." His hand touched his birthmark, the star that had led him home. "I learned that from a woman who wrote me letters for 35 years, knowing she might never send them. As he walked out into the swirling snow, his phone rang. Grace, his assistant, sounding urgent. "Sir, the board is threatening to vote you out. And there's something else. Richard Sterling is at the bakery." Alexander's heart stopped. Then, with deadly calm, he said, "Call Davidson. Execute Plan B. All of it." "Sir, that will expose everything. The Sterlings, your adoptive family's involvement, all of it." Good, he started his car, tires spinning in the snow. It's time everyone's truth came to light. Back in the mansion, Richard Hayes, SR, watched his son's departure through frosted windows. "He'll lose everything," he muttered. But Elizabeth, touching her own cheeks, realized they were wet with tears. "No," she whispered, understanding finally reaching her heart. He's already found everything he was looking for. In the swirling snow, Alexander Hayes drove toward a small bakery where real love waited, leaving behind a fortress built on secrets and finding his way home by following the stars. Emma stood at the bakery window, watching the snow fall as she had every morning since coming to live with Margaret. But today was different. Today she clutched a small diary in her hands, her real mother's diary, the one Margaret didn't know she'd found hidden in the attic. "Emma," Margaret called from the kitchen. "The star cookies are ready for decorating." Coming, she quickly tucked the diary into her coat pocket, its pages heavy with secrets she was too young to fully understand but old enough to piece together. The bell chimed as Richard Sterling entered, bringing with him a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Emma watched from behind the counter as Margaret's face went pale. "What a charming establishment," Sterling said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Though I hear it's struggling. Much like your health, I'm told." Emma's small hands clenched. She knew this man from the diary entries. Her mother's last words described him clearly: "The man who runs the hospital board, who denied my treatment because I couldn't pay. He looked at me the same way he must have looked at that nurse years ago, like poor people's lives don't matter." "I'm not selling," Margaret said firmly, though Emma could see her hands trembling. No, Sterling removed his leather gloves slowly. "Then perhaps we should discuss certain old records I've kept. About a night in December 35 years ago. About a baby with a very distinctive birthmark." Emma stepped forward, her voice clear and strong despite her racing heart. "You mean the star? Like the one on my mom's hospital papers?" Both adults turned to stare at her. Emma pulled out a folded document from her pocket, her mother's denied treatment appeal, stamped with Sterling Industries logo. "Emma," Margaret whispered, "where did you get that?" "The same place I found Mom's diary." She looked directly at Sterling. "She wrote about you. About how you let her die because she was poor. Just like you made Grandma Margaret give up her baby because she wasn't rich enough to fight you." Sterling's composed facade cracked slightly. Children should be seen and not heard. "That's funny," Emma continued, her young voice carrying wisdom beyond her years. "That's what your son said to my mom when she begged for treatment. I know because she wrote it down, every word." Margaret moved to stop her, but Emma was already pulling out her mother's diary. She wrote other things too. About the night she was working as a student nurse when she saw a young nurse give birth during a blackout. About the powerful men who came the next morning. About the baby with the star mark. Sterling took a step forward, his face darkening, but Emma stood her ground. "My mum kept everything. She believed in evidence. That's what nurses do." "Emma, please," Margaret pleaded, but the child wasn't finished. "I showed the diary to Alexander yesterday," Emma revealed. "He said sometimes the smallest people have the biggest power to change things." Sterling's composure shattered completely. "You little." "I wouldn't." Alexander's voice cut through the tension as he entered the bakery. "She's already sent copies to every major news outlet, along with some very interesting documents about Sterling Industries' medical research practices." Emma ran to Alexander, who placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Tell him the rest," he encouraged gently. "My mom was smart," Emma said, her chin high. She knew someday someone would need her proof. That's why she made copies of everything. About the baby, about the threats, about all the people you let die because they couldn't pay. Margaret stared at her adopted granddaughter in amazement. This child, who'd lost so much, had been quietly working to right old wrongs. "You're bluffing," Sterling snarled, but his face had gone ashen. "Check your phone," Alexander suggested. "The story's already breaking. Sterling Industries' legacy of corruption, from forced adoptions to denied treatment." Emma looked up at Margaret, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but Mum's diary said sometimes you have to be brave for the people you love." Margaret pulled her close, finally understanding why Emma had insisted on alphabetizing the attic, why she'd spent hours playing office with old papers. Sterling backed toward the door, his empire crumbling with each notification on his phone. "This isn't over." "Actually," Emma called after him, "it's been over since the night my mom decided to keep records. She called it insurance for the future I just helped the future arrive." As Sterling fled into the snow, Alexander looked at Emma with new respect. "You knew all along, didn't you? About Margaret and me." Emma smiled, touching her own wrist where a small star-shaped birthmark was beginning to fade, a temporary tattoo she'd created from Margaret's old photos. Sometimes, she said, love needs a little help finding its way home. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having transformed Millbrook into a winter wonderland. Margaret stood in her bakery kitchen, teaching Alexander how to knead dough, his first lesson in creating something with his hands rather than his wealth. "You're pressing too hard," she instructed gently, covering his flour-dusted hands with her own. "Bread is like people, it needs a firm touch, but too much pressure breaks it." Alexander nodded, trying to ignore how his throat tightened at her touch. His hands, more accustomed to signing contracts than creating sustenance, felt clumsy and uncertain. Yet there was something profound in this simple act of making bread, something that spoke to the void he'd carried all his life. "That's how my mother taught me," Margaret continued, her voice soft with memory. "Before the hospital, before everything. She said bread was love made visible." Emma sat at the counter, carefully decorating cookies while pretending not to watch them. Since her revelation about the diary and her role in exposing Sterling, she'd been quieter than usual, as if uncertain how her actions had changed their fragile new family dynamic. "You should have told me about the diary," Margaret said to her, not for the first time. "About all of it." Emma's small shoulders tensed. "Are you mad?" "No, sweetheart," Margaret moved to embrace her. "I'm proud. You fought for justice just like your mother would have." Alexander watched them, seeing in their interaction everything his privileged upbringing had lacked: unconditional love, honest emotion, the freedom to be imperfect. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it, knowing it would be more news about Sterling Industries' collapsing stock price or the board's demands for his resignation. "The bread needs to rise," Margaret announced, covering the dough. Just like hope, she swayed slightly, gripping the counter. "The treatment," Alexander said, catching her arm. "We need to discuss it." "It's too expensive," she began, but he cut her off. "Money isn't the issue anymore. With Sterling Industries exposed, their experimental treatments are being released to other hospitals. I've already arranged." No, Margaret's voice was firm. "I won't take charity, even from my son." The word hung between them, son. She'd never said it directly before. "It's not charity," Alexander replied, his voice rough with emotion. "It's 35 years of Christmas presents I never got to give you." Emma looked up from her cookies. "Plus all the birthday presents, and Mother's Day, and just because presents, that's like," she calculated on her fingers, 1 million presents. Margaret laughed despite herself, the sound warming the kitchen more than any oven could. A million presents. At least Alexander agreed, playing along. Though I think I'll start with keeping this bakery open, he held up a hand as Margaret began to protest. Not as charity. As an investment. This place. It's more than just a business, it's a home. The word surprised him as it left his mouth, but he realized it was true. In just a few days, this small bakery with its warm lights and star-shaped cookies had become more of a home than his penthouse ever was. We could make it bigger, Emma suggested excitedly, with tables for people to sit and eat, and a special corner for kids whose parents are in the hospital, like I was. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Emma. And maybe, the little girl continued, her voice growing softer, maybe we could name it Stars Aligned Bakery because that's what happened. The stars aligned and brought us all together. Alexander felt something shift in his chest, a piece of his carefully constructed walls crumbling. He looked at Margaret, saw the same emotion reflected in her eyes. I have a better idea, he said. We'll call it Margaret's Stars because you're the one who never stopped believing, who kept writing those letters, who took in a little girl who needed love just like I did. Margaret pressed her hands to her mouth, overwhelmed. Emma hopped off her stool and hugged her tightly. After a moment's hesitation, Alexander joined them, completing their circle. The bell above the door chimed. They looked up to see Sarah, Margaret's young employee, standing there with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I don't mean to interrupt. It's just the whole town is talking. About Sterling, about what he did to you, Mrs. Wilson. And about Emma's mother. She took a deep breath. My sister was denied treatment by Sterling's hospital too. She didn't make it either. Margaret opened her arms and Sarah fell into them. Then your family too, she said simply. Alexander watched as his mother, his real mother, offered comfort to another wounded soul. He thought about his massive corporate empire, built on deals and dominance, and realized he'd never created anything as meaningful as this moment. The bread's rising, Emma announced, peeking under the cloth, just like our family. Alexander touched his birthmark, then Margaret's, then the temporary star Emma had given herself. 3 generations marked by the same sign, bound not by blood alone, but by choice, by love, by the courage to fight for what was right. His phone buzzed again. This time he checked it, a message from Davidson. Sir, the board is convening an emergency session. They're voting on your removal this afternoon. Alexander looked at his newfound family, Margaret teaching Sarah how to shape cookie stars, Emma humming as she arranged them on trays. He thought about the empire he might lose, and the home he'd finally found. Let them vote, he murmured, rolling up his sleeves to help with the cookies. Some things are worth more than power. The morning sun streamed through the bakery windows, casting star-shaped patterns on the floor. Outside, Millbrook was awakening to a new day, unaware that within this humble bakery, a family was rising too, as steady and sure as bread dough, as sweet as freshly baked cookies, as eternal as the stars themselves. The afternoon brought dark clouds and darker news. Alexander stood in Margaret's small office, watching snowflakes begin to fall again as he listened to his phone. They're not just removing you as CEO, Davidson reported grimly. Sterling's allies are freezing your assets. Every account, every property. They're claiming fraud, insider trading, corporate espionage, anything to destroy you. Through the door, he could hear Emma teaching Margaret how to use the tablet he'd bought her, their laughter a stark contrast to his current reality. How bad? By tonight you won't even be able to buy those cookies. You're standing next to, Davidson replied. But that's not the worst part. Sterling's making moves against the bakery too. Health code violations, tax audits, everything they can throw. Alexander's jaw clenched. They're punishing her to get to me. Sir Davidson hesitated. There's more. Your adopted mother, Elizabeth Hayes, she's talking to the press. Claiming Margaret manipulated you, used a dying child to play on your emotions. They're painting her as a con artist who orchestrated this whole thing. The injustice of it burned in his chest. Through the window he could see reporters gathering outside, their cameras focused on the bakery like vultures circling prey. The office door opened and Margaret entered, her face pale but determined. The hospital called. They're rescinding my acceptance into the treatment program. Apparently there are complications with my paperwork. Sterling Alexander growled. He's using your life as leverage. I know she sat heavily in her chair. The bank called too. They're foreclosing on the bakery. Something about immediate repayment of loans. Before Alexander could respond, Sarah burst in. Mrs. Wilson, there are health inspectors outside, and some of our regular customers are cancelling their Christmas orders. They say they can't support a business involved in scandal. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for her medication. Perhaps if I just spoke to them, explained. No, Alexander's voice was steel. You don't have to explain anything. They're the ones who need to explain why they're persecuting a dying woman and an orphan child to protect wealthy criminals. Emma slipped into the office, her small face worried. The mean people outside are saying bad things about us? They're calling you a gold digger? Grandma, what's a gold digger? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Oh, sweetheart. The phone rang again. Davidson. Sir, Sterling's going nuclear. He's leaked documents suggesting Margaret gave up multiple babies for profit. It's all fabricated, but the media's running with it. And they're bringing up Emma's mother's death, implying Margaret was negligent. Something in Alexander snapped. He'd built his empire playing by their rules, fighting in their arena. But this attacking a sick woman, smearing a dead mother's memory, traumatizing a child, this was beyond unconscionable. They want a war, he said quietly. Let's give them one. He dialed a number he'd never used before. Ms. Chen? This is Alexander Hayes. About that interview you've been requesting. I'm ready to talk. About everything. The Sterlings, the Hayes family, all of it. But I have conditions. Margaret touched his arm. Alexander, no, you'll lose everything. He covered her hand with his, feeling the same determination that had helped her survive 35 years of silence. No, mother. For the first time in my life, I'm about to gain everything that matters. Emma tugged at his sleeve. I still have Mom's diary and all her evidence. Maybe it's time for everyone to know the whole truth. Alexander knelt to her level. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. Your mother's story, everything she fought for, it'll all be public. Emma's chin lifted, showing the same courage that had driven her mother to document Sterling's crimes. Mom always said the truth is like stars, it finds a way to shine through the darkness. The reporters outside were multiplying, their cameras flashing like lightning in the growing storm. Sarah watched them nervously. The whole town's gathering out there. Some are supporting us, but others. Then let's give them something to really talk about, Alexander said, an idea forming. He turned to Margaret. Do you trust me? She squeezed his hand. With everything? He nodded, then addressed them all. Sarah, start baking. Everything we have. Emma, get your mother's diary and evidence. Margaret, he smiled softly, get those Christmas letters ready. It's time to show the world what real family looks like. What are you going to do? Margaret asked. I'm going to tell a story. About a nurse who loved her son so much she let him go. About a little girl who kept her mother's fight for justice alive. About how the richest man in New York found his real wealth in a small-town bakery. He touched his birthmark. And about how sometimes the stars align to right old wrongs. His phone buzzed with messages from the board, from his lawyers, from Elizabeth Hayes begging him to reconsider. He silenced them all. Outside, the snow fell harder, but the lights of Margaret's bakery burned bright against the gathering darkness. Alexander Hayes, who had spent his life building walls to protect himself, was about to tear them all down. Not for revenge, though the Sterlings deserved it. Not for justice, though that would come. But for love. For family. For the truth that had waited 35 years to be told. "One more thing," he said, turning to Emma. "Those star cookies of yours? We're going to need a lot of them. Because after today, this bakery isn't just going to be a business." "What will it be?" she asked. Alexander smiled, the same smile that had won him billions, now softened by something more valuable than money. A lighthouse for every lost soul who needs to find their way home. The storm outside grew stronger, but within Margaret's bakery, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that would shake foundations, expose lies, and prove that sometimes the greatest power lies not in wealth or influence, but in the simple courage to love without conditions. As evening fell, Margaret's bakery took on an almost ethereal glow against the darkening sky. Inside, the transformation was more than just physical, it was spiritual, emotional, fundamental. Alexander stood at the industrial mixer, his designer suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up and hands covered in flour. The man who once commanded boardrooms with ruthless precision was now learning the gentle art of folding bread dough, each movement a meditation on change. "You're getting better," Margaret observed, watching him work. She sat at her small desk, chemotherapy appointment card in one hand, stack of Christmas letters in the other. The treatment they'd fought so hard to secure would begin tomorrow, but tonight there were more important battles to wage. "I had a good teacher," he replied, then caught her swaying slightly. "You should rest." "There'll be time for rest later," she said firmly. "Right now we have work to do." Emma sat cross-legged on the counter, carefully arranging her mother's evidence alongside Margaret's letters. Mom's last entry was about hope, she said, reading from the diary. She wrote, "Maybe I won't survive this battle, but someone stronger will finish it. The truth is like rising bread, you can't keep it down forever." Sarah worked nearby, teaching other townspeople who had come to help, their initial suspicion transformed into solidarity. Tom from the hardware store, Martha Chen from the school, even old Mr. Jenkins all had stories about Sterling's influence, all had losses to count. "My sister Sarah," said softly, showing Margaret a photo. She needed that treatment too. They said she wasn't qualified for the program. "My son's college fund," Tom added, kneading dough with calloused hands. "Lost it all in Sterling's investment scam." Martha Chen nodded. "3 of my students' families lost their homes when Hayes International. I'm sorry, Alexander, but—" "No," he interrupted. "Don't apologize. You're right. I was part of the problem. I built my empire on other people's pain, just like Sterling. The only difference was, I told myself it was just business." "But you're different now," Emma said with a child's simple certainty. "You chose love instead of money." Alexander looked at his hands, covered in flour rather than metaphorical blood. "I'm trying to be." The bell above the door chimed. Grace, his former assistant, entered carrying boxes of documents. "The board sent these to the press," she announced. "Everything they plan to use against you tomorrow." "And you intercepted them?" Alexander asked, surprised. Grace squared her shoulders. "I resigned this morning. Some things are more important than a corner office." She looked at Margaret. "My mother was a nurse too. She always said healing comes in many forms." Margaret smiled, understanding blooming between them. "Would you like to learn how to make star cookies?" Outside, the media circus grew, their cameras capturing the strange scene through the bakery windows. A billionaire learning to bake, a dying woman teaching strength, a child showing them all the way home. Alexander's phone rang. Elizabeth Hayes again. This time he answered. "The board meeting is in 12 hours, she said without preamble. End this madness now. Come home and we can still save everything. He looked around the bakery, at the family he'd found, at the truth being baked into every loaf of bread. I am home, Mother, maybe for the first time in my life. You're throwing away everything we built for you. No, he corrected gently. I'm building something real. Something that can't be bought or sold or manipulated. Something that will last longer than any corporate empire. What could possibly be worth more than what we've given you? Alexander watched Emma teaching Grace how to shape stars, saw Margaret sharing her strength with Sarah, observed the townspeople coming together to fight injustice with flour and truth. Love, he answered simply, and hung up. Margaret approached him, holding out an envelope, another Christmas letter, dated today. I think it's time I finally started sending these. He took it with trembling hands, opened it right there. My dearest Alexander, for 35 years I've written to a son I thought I'd never know. Now you're standing in my bakery, covered in flour, choosing a hard truth over an easy lie. I've never been more proud. The stars didn't just align, they led us home. All my love. Mom. Alexander blinked back tears, years of carefully constructed walls crumbling like dried flour. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to be a son, a brother, a real human being instead of a corporate machine. Margaret touched his birthmark, then hers. You're already doing it. Every time you choose love over power, truth over profit, family over empire, you're becoming who you were always meant to be. Emma hopped down from the counter, coming to stand between them. And who is that? Alexander knelt down, looking into her wise young eyes. Someone worthy of your mother's courage, of Margaret's love, of your trust. That's easy, Emma said, hugging him. You just have to be yourself, the real you, not the one they made you be. The transformation was visible in his softening expression, in his gentler touch, in the way he looked at the simple act of making bread as if it contained all the secrets of the universe. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside Margaret's bakery, something else was falling, masks, pretenses, old ways of being, and in their place, something new was rising, as steady and sure as the dough they worked with such care. Tomorrow would bring its battles, the board meeting, the media storm, Sterling's revenge. But tonight, in this warm space filled with the scent of bread and the sound of shared laughter, Alexander Hayes was becoming someone new, someone real, someone who finally understood that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars, but in the courage to choose love over fear, truth over power, and family over empire. The transformation, like the best bread, would take time. But the yeast of change was already at work, and there would be no going back. Christmas Eve dawned with brutal clarity, the temperature plummeting to record lows as fate aligned three devastating events: Margaret's first chemotherapy session, the board's vote to remove Alexander, and Sterling Industries' final attack. Alexander stood in the hospital corridor, watching through glass as Margaret received her first treatment. She looked small in the medical chair, yet her eyes held the same determination he'd seen in the mirror all his life. Emma sat beside her, reading aloud from one of the Christmas letters Margaret had written decades ago. His phone buzzed. Davidson. Sir, Sterling's making his move. They're not just going after the company, they're freezing all charitable donations. The Children's Hospital project, the medical research grants, everything. But through the treatment room window, Alexander watched Emma reach for Margaret's hand as the medication began to flow. The same hand that had written 35 years of letters, that had taken in an orphan child, that had taught him how love could be baked into bread. How long, he asked Davidson. The board votes in an hour, but Sterling's already at the bakery with demolition orders. He's not waiting for legal proceedings. Alexander's blood ran cold. The bakery? He can't, the paperwork isn't even processed. Since when has that stopped them? "Sir, there's a crowd gathering. The whole town's there." Another call beeped through Sarah, her voice panicked. "Alexander, they're trying to force their way in. Sterling's here with bulldozers and police. He's saying the building is condemned." Through the glass, Margaret must have sensed something was wrong. She tried to rise from the treatment chair, but the nurses held her back. "Stay with her," Alexander commanded Emma through the intercom. "No matter what happens, don't let her leave this treatment." Emma nodded, her small face serious. "We'll be okay. Go save our home." Alexander ran through the hospital corridors, his footsteps echoing like heartbeats. Outside, the bitter cold hit him like a physical blow. His driver was waiting, but traffic was gridlocked with holiday travelers and fresh snow. "Get me there any way you can," he ordered. As they navigated the icy streets, his phone erupted with messages. The board, demanding his immediate presence. Elizabeth Hayes, pleading for him to reconsider. Davidson, warning of media crews descending on the bakery. Sarah, reporting that the crowd was growing, tensions rising. But it was the last message that stopped his heart, a video from Sterling himself. The camera panned across the bakery's interior, showing workers already beginning to gut the place. Such a shame. Sterling's voice oozed false sympathy. "All those Christmas memories gone. But perhaps if your mother had made better choices 35 years ago." Alexander's hands clenched. The same day Sterling had chosen to destroy the bakery was the day Margaret had been forced to give up her baby. The symmetry was too cruel to be coincidental. His phone rang again. "Grace. Alexander, I found something. The demolition order Sterling's using, it's forged. I have proof, but we need to stop him before." The call cut off as they rounded the corner onto Main Street. Alexander's breath caught at the scene before him. Hundreds of townspeople stood in the snow, forming a human chain around Margaret's bakery. Sarah and Grace were at the front, facing down police officers. Tom from the hardware store had chained himself to the door. Martha Chen was leading a group of students in Christmas carols, their voices rising in defiance. And at the center of it all stood Richard Sterling, flanked by lawyers and demolition crews, his face twisted with the same contempt he'd shown a young nurse 3 decades ago. "Ah, the prodigal son arrives," Sterling called out as Alexander approached. "Come to watch your inheritance crumble? Like mother, like son, neither of you could protect what you loved." The crowd parted as Alexander walked forward, snow crunching under his feet. He looked different than he had just days ago, his expensive suit replaced by flour-dusted clothes, his corporate mask cracked to reveal something more human underneath. "You're wrong," Alexander said, his voice carrying across the hushed square. "About inheritance, about protection, about love." He turned to address the crowd. 35 years ago, this man forced a young nurse to give up her baby. He used money and power to separate a mother from her child. Today he's trying to do it again, to destroy the home she built, to erase the love she never stopped giving. Sterling laughed coldly. "Spare us the sentiment. This is business." "No," Alexander countered, pulling out Margaret's letters. "This is family. This is community. This is everything you couldn't buy or bully or destroy." His phone buzzed again. Emma, sending a photo from the hospital. Margaret in her treatment chair, holding up a sign some stars never stop shining. At that moment, as if on cue, snow began to fall. But these weren't ordinary flakes, they were large, 6-pointed crystals that caught the light like stars falling from heaven. The crowd gasped as the crystalline snow swirled around them. Even Sterling's demolition crew paused, looking up in wonder. "You see that old?" Mr. Jenkins called out. "Same kind of snow that fell the night Margaret's boy was born, the night the stars aligned." Alexander held out his hand, catching one of the star-shaped snowflakes. It melted on his birthmark, a moment of perfect symmetry. His phone buzzed one final time the board, threatening immediate action if he didn't appear for the vote. But as he stood there, watching star snow fall on the bakery his mother had filled with 35 years of love, Alexander Hayes finally understood what real power looked like. It wasn't in boardrooms or bank accounts. It wasn't in demolition orders or legal threats. It was here, in a community standing together. In a mother's endless love. In a child's unwavering faith. In star-shaped snowflakes falling on Christmas Eve. The scene at Margaret's bakery had become a standoff. Police officers shifted uncomfortably, caught between Sterling's demolition orders and the human chain of townspeople. News cameras captured every moment as star-shaped snowflakes continued to fall, turning the confrontation into something almost mythical. Alexander's phone rang the board's final warning. He had 10 minutes to appear or lose everything. "You're running out of time," Sterling taunted, his breath frosting in the bitter air. "The board is waiting, though I suspect they've already made their decision." Alexander looked at the bakery, its warm lights defiant against the gathering darkness, its windows still displaying Emma's star cookies. Inside, he could see Sarah and Grace protecting the box of Christmas letters, the evidence of both crimes and love spanning decades. His phone buzzed again, a video call from the hospital. Emma's face appeared, tears in her eyes. "Alexander, Grandma's getting worse. The doctors say her blood pressure is dropping. She's asking for you." Behind her, he could see Margaret struggling to sit up, fighting against both the treatment and her own body's weakness. The same fighting spirit that had sustained her through 35 years of silence now battled to keep her alive long enough to protect her home. "Tell her to stay strong," he instructed Emma. "Tell her," he paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Tell her I finally understand what she tried to teach me about bread and love and courage." Sterling scoffed, touching. "But sentiment won't save your empire, or this pathetic bakery." "No," Alexander agreed, his voice hardening, "but the truth will." He nodded to Grace, who immediately began live streaming to every major news outlet. Then he held up Emma's mother's diary. 35 years ago, you forced a young nurse to give up her baby. You thought money and power could bury that truth. But you didn't count on another nurse, Emma's mother, documenting everything. Every threat, every covered-up death, every patient denied care because they couldn't pay. The crowd murmured as Grace projected the diary's contents onto the bakery's white wall, creating a screen of evidence visible to all. "And you certainly didn't count on that nurse having a daughter brave enough to continue her fight," Alexander continued, "or on that daughter finding a home with the very woman you tried to silence." His phone rang again. "Davidson." "Sir, Sterling Industries stock is plummeting. The board is seeing the live stream. They're calling for an emergency shareholders meeting." Sterling's face had gone pale, but he rallied. "You'll destroy yourself too. That empire you built? Gone. Your reputation? Ruined. All for what? A dying woman and an orphan brat." No, Alexander's voice carried across the square, for the truth, for justice, for love. At that moment, Emma's voice came through his phone's speaker, amplified for all to hear. "Alexander, Grandma's saying something." Margaret's weak voice filled the square. "The stars align when lost souls find their way home." The crowd looked up as the star snow fell harder, creating halos around the streetlights. Old Mr. Jenkins began to sing Silent Night, and one by one, the townspeople joined in. Sterling made a grab for the diary, but Sarah and Grace were faster, protecting it with their bodies. "It's over," Grace told him. "The truth is like stars, it always finds a way to shine." Alexander's phone showed 1 minute until the board's deadline, but as he looked at the bakery, at the community united around it, at the evidence of love and courage projected on its walls, he made the decision he should have made 35 years ago. He dialed the board. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying both on the phone and to the crowd, "I choose love over power, family over empire, truth over profit. I choose Margaret's Bakery and everything it stands for." "You're making a mistake," Sterling snarled, but his voice shook as police officers began approaching him instead of the protesters. "No," Alexander replied calmly. "The mistake was thinking wealth meant more than worth. The mistake was letting men like you decide who deserves to live, to love, to have a home." His phone exploded with notifications. Sterling Industries CEO arrested. Hayes International Board suspends voting. Whistleblower evidence exposes decades of corporate crime. Star-shaped snowfall phenomenon during Christmas Eve standoff. But the only message that mattered came from Emma Grandma's stabilizing. "The doctors say the treatment is working." Alexander turned to address the crowd, snow falling like stars around him. 35 years ago, a mother's love was buried under power and greed. Today we unbury it. This bakery isn't just a building, it's a testament to love that never dies, truth that can't be silenced, and the courage to choose what's right over what's easy. The demolition crews were already packing up, some of them leaving their helmets behind in silent support. The police began escorting Sterling away, reading him his rights as cameras flashed. Alexander's phone rang one last time. Elizabeth Hayes. "You've lost everything," she said tearfully. He looked at the bakery, at the community surrounding it, at the evidence of love projected on its walls. "No, Mother, I found everything I was looking for." The star snow continued to fall as Christmas Eve deepened, transforming Margaret's Bakery into a beacon of light and truth. Inside, Sarah and Grace began baking fresh bread, not just for sustenance, but as a symbol of love's triumph over power, of courage's victory over fear. And in the hospital, Margaret watched it all unfold on television, tears falling as she witnessed her son choose love over empire, truth over power, family over fortune. Emma held her hand as the treatment continued its healing work, both physical and spiritual. As Sterling was being led away, a new figure emerged from the swirling snow. Senator James Sterling, Richard's father, walked deliberately toward the bakery, his presence commanding immediate silence from the crowd. "What a touching display of small-town sentiment," the senator's voice cut through the carol-filled air. "But perhaps we should tell the whole truth, Margaret, about that Christmas Eve 35 years ago." Margaret's voice came through Alexander's phone, weak but determined. "Let me talk to him. I've carried his threats long enough." Alexander placed the phone on speaker, projecting Margaret's voice across the square. The star snow continued to fall as decades of silence prepared to shatter. "You destroyed more than just my life that night," Margaret began, each word carrying the weight of buried truth. "You destroyed your own humanity." "I protected my family's legacy," the senator countered. No, Margaret's voice strengthened. "You protected your lies. Shall we tell them why you were really at the hospital that night? Not just for your son's indiscretion, but for your own." The crowd murmured as Emma stepped forward, holding another diary. "This one belonged to my grandmother," she announced. "She was a nurse at St. Mary's too. The night Alexander was born, she wrote everything down." The senator's composed facade cracked slightly. "That's impossible. All records were destroyed." "Not all," Emma continued, her young voice carrying the weight of generational justice. "My grandmother wrote about 2 babies born during the blackout, both with star-shaped birthmarks, both taken away by your order." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Alexander felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "Twins," Margaret's voice confirmed. "I only got to hold them for a moment before you took them both. You gave one to the Hayes family to spy on your business rival. The other," her voice broke, "what did you do with my other son?" The senator's laugh was cold as the falling snow. "You think you can prove any of this? After 35 years? Actually, Grace stepped forward, her tablet displaying hospital records. "We can. The power outage that night? It affected every system except one, the security cameras. Cameras whose footage was stored off-site. Footage I found in the hospital's old archive facility. She pressed play. The grainy video showed a younger Senator Sterling ordering nurses to separate twin boys, both with distinctive birthmarks. His voice was clear, one to Hayes, one to Sterling. Neither mother nor children can ever know. Our empires depend on it. Alexander staggered, his world fracturing further. Richard, my twin brother. Your rival, the senator corrected. We raised each of you to destroy the other's empire. The perfect corporate war, driven by blood you never knew you shared. Through the phone, they heard Margaret's medical monitors beeping frantically. My boys, she whispered. My beautiful boys. I never knew. Never got to name you both. Emma's voice cut through the chaos. That's why the stars aligned today. They were bringing both brothers home. As if in response, the star snow fell harder, creating a curtain of light between the senator and the crowd. Through it, a figure approached from the direction of Sterling Industries, Richard Sterling, having broken free from police custody. But his face was different now, stripped of arrogance, showing the same shock Alexander felt. Their eyes met across the snow-filled square, two men seeing themselves mirrored not just in appearance but in the wounds they carried. Brothers, Richard whispered, touching his own birthmark. All this time we were fighting a war we never chose, Alexander finished. The senator moved to speak, but Emma stepped between them all. In my mum's last letter, she wrote something about truth. She said it's like these star snowflakes. Once it starts falling, nothing can stop it. Margaret's voice came through the phone again, stronger now despite her weakness. My sons, my beautiful stolen sons, come home. Please, come home. Richard looked at the bakery, at the evidence of love projected on its walls, at the brother he'd been raised to destroy. I spent my life thinking power was the only way to fill the emptiness inside me. We both did, Alexander agreed, but maybe what we were really looking for was here all along. The senator's mask finally crumbled. Everything I built, everything I sacrificed, was nothing compared to what you stole. Margaret's voice rang out. Not just my boys, but their chance to know love. Real love, not power. The kind of love that writes letters for 35 years, that takes in orphaned children, that chooses truth over empire. The crowd had gone silent, watching this family drama unfold against the backdrop of falling stars. Then Emma, wise beyond her years, did something unexpected. She walked to the bakery door, took out 2 star cookies, and offered one to each brother. Grandma says love is like baking, she said simply. Sometimes you have to break things down to create something better. Alexander and Richard stood in the swirling snow, each holding a star cookie, each seeing in the other the missing piece of themselves. The senator watched his carefully constructed empire of lies crumble like ancient bread. Through the phone, they heard Margaret begin to sing softly a lullaby she'd held inside for 35 years, meant for 2 babies she'd never gotten to know. One by one, the townspeople joined in, their voices rising with the falling stars. And there, on a Christmas Eve that echoed one from 35 years ago, 2 brothers took their first steps toward home. Not the home of power and empire their adopted families had built, but the real home where love was baked into bread, where truth fell like stars, and where a mother's heart had kept beating for 2 sons she'd never stopped loving. The public confrontation had become something else entirely, a restoration, a redemption, a return, and as the star snow continued to fall, it seemed even nature itself was celebrating the alignment that had finally brought a family full circle. Dear friends, as our story reaches this emotional turning point, we invite you to become part of our storytelling family. Just as Margaret never stopped writing letters for 35 years, we never stop crafting stories that touch hearts and inspire souls. Your subscription means more than just numbers. It's your way of saying love, family, and hope still matter in today's world. Like the star-shaped snowflakes in our story, Let your support be a sign that you believe in the power of redemption and second chances. Subscribe, and let's continue discovering these magical moments together. The dawn after Christmas Eve brought with it the cost of truth. Alexander stood in his penthouse, watching movers pack up his life. The board's decision had been unanimous: complete divestment, immediate removal, frozen assets. 35 floors below, news vans still circled the building like vultures. His phone, once constantly buzzing with business alerts, now displayed headlines that cut deep. Hayes empire crumbles, billionaire CEO loses all. Twin scandal rocks corporate America, but Sterling Hayes' dynasty built on stolen children. The doorbell rang. He opened it to find Elizabeth Hayes, his adoptive mother, looking older than he'd ever seen her. "The house is being seized," she said without preamble. "Everything we built. Gone." She touched his cheek with trembling fingers. "Was it worth it, destroying your family for them?" Alexander caught her hand gently. "You taught me that family is built on truth. Or was that just another corporate strategy?" She flinched. "We gave you everything. Except the one thing I needed: the truth about who I was." His phone buzzed. Davidson with more losses to report. The Children's Hospital project cancelled. Charitable foundations frozen. Investment portfolios liquidated. Properties seized. But it was the next message that made his blood run cold. From Sarah, the treatment center called. "Insurance denied Margaret's coverage. They're stopping treatment tomorrow." Elizabeth saw his face change. "You can't help her now," she said softly. "You have nothing left to give." Alexander looked around his emptying penthouse at the trappings of success being boxed away. "You're wrong. I have the only thing that matters: the truth. Truth won't pay for cancer treatment." "No," he agreed, touching his birthmark, "but it will set us free." His phone rang again. Richard, his twin brother, speaking for the first time since their revelation. "They're taking everything from me too. Father's under house arrest. The empire's burning." A pause. "But I keep thinking about her voice, singing that lullaby." "Come to the bakery," Alexander said suddenly. "Bring whatever documents you have. It's time we write our own story. They'll destroy what's left of us." Maybe Alexander looked at the city below, at the life he'd built and lost. Or maybe we'll finally build something real. Elizabeth watched him pack a single box: Margaret's letters, Emma's mother's diary, the evidence of love that had survived 35 years of silence. "You really are her son," she said finally, understanding and regret mingling in her voice. "We tried to make you into something else, but you have her heart." "I have her strength," he corrected, "and her courage to choose love over power." His phone lit up with Davidson's final report. Current net worth $0. Available assets none. Outstanding debts mounting. Status bankrupt. Alexander smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. "Perfect," he said, surprising both Elizabeth and himself. "Now I can begin again, with nothing but truth and love to build on." "You're mad," Elizabeth whispered. "No," he picked up his box of treasures. "For the first time in my life, I'm sane." As he walked to the elevator, she called after him, "What will you do? Where will you go?" Alexander turned back one last time, snow starting to fall outside his window. Not star-shaped this time, just ordinary flakes, but beautiful in their own way. "I'm going home," he said simply, "to my mother's bakery, where love is baked into bread and truth falls like stars and family means more than fortune." The elevator doors closed on his old life, opening moments later to a lobby full of reporters. Their questions hit him like hail. "Mr. Hayes, how does it feel to lose everything? What about the Children's Hospital? Is it true about the twins?" Did you know all along? Alexander walked through them, holding his box of truth, his heart lighter with each step despite the losses mounting around him. Outside, his luxury car was gone, replaced by Sarah's old pickup truck. "Your chariot awaits," she smiled, "though it's not quite what you're used to." "It's perfect," he said, meaning it. "It'll get me home." As they drove through the morning traffic, his phone buzzed one last time. "Emma, Grandma's asking for you. She says stars align not just to guide us home, but to show us what really matters." Alexander touched his birthmark, thinking of his twin doing the same somewhere across the city. They'd lost their empires, their fortunes, their carefully constructed lives. But as Sarah's truck carried him toward the bakery that smelled of love and truth, he realized he'd never felt richer. The losses were staggering, the cost of truth astronomical. But sitting in a rusty pickup truck, carrying a box full of letters and love, Alexander Hayes was finally truly wealthy. Because sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you never knew you were looking for. And that, he realized, was worth all the fortunes in the world. The fractures began to show at Margaret's bakery that afternoon. The payment for her treatment had bounced, and the hospital was threatening to discontinue her care. Emma sat by the front window, watching snowplows clear away the magical star snow, leaving only grey slush behind. "They're saying we have to leave," Sarah reported quietly, showing Alexander the eviction notice. Despite their Christmas Eve victory, Sterling's old allies on the town council had found building code violations dating back decades. Richard paced the small space, his designer shoes leaving wet tracks on the worn floor. "This is insane. We were billionaires yesterday. How can we not find a way to?" "Because they've frozen everything," Alexander interrupted, watching Emma arrange and rearrange her mother's diary pages. Every account, every asset, every favor we could call in. The bell above the door chimed. Grace entered, her face grim. "The press is having a field day. They're calling it the twin tragedy, how the Sterling-Hayes conspiracy destroyed two of America's biggest companies." "Let them talk," Alexander said, but his voice betrayed his exhaustion. Emma looked up suddenly. "What about the other families?" They all turned to her. "The ones like my mom. The ones they hurt. Maybe if they all told their stories." Before anyone could respond, the door chimed again. Elizabeth Hayes and Catherine Sterling, their adoptive mothers, entered together, their expensive coats dusted with snow. "We've been talking," Elizabeth began. "Conspiring, you mean?" Richard's bitter laugh echoed his brother's thoughts. Catherine Sterling stepped forward. "We're here to make things right." "Like you did 35 years ago," Alexander's voice was ice. "No," Elizabeth pulled out a thick folder. "Like we should have done then. Everything we know, every document we kept, every truth we buried, it's all here." The brothers exchanged looks, 35 years of manipulation making them wary. Emma, however, had no such reservations. She walked up to both women, her young face serious. "Did you ever love them? Really love them, not just use them?" The question hung in the air like frost. Catherine broke first. "I couldn't have children," she whispered. "When James Senator Sterling offered us a baby, I didn't ask questions. I should have. But Richard became my whole world." "We both convinced ourselves we were giving you better lives," Elizabeth added. "But watching you choose love over empire, truth over power," she stopped, emotion finally cracking her perfect facade. The bakery door chimed again. Davidson, carrying more files. Sirs, he corrected, looking between the brothers. "There's something you need to see." He laid out documents showing a complex web of offshore accounts, hidden assets, shadow corporations, all controlled by Senator Sterling and Richard Hayes, SR, all built on the foundation of separated twins and stolen lives. "They didn't just take you from," Margaret Davidson explained. "There were others." Different hospitals, different years, but always the same pattern: vulnerable mothers, powerful men, babies separated for corporate gain. The silence that followed was deafening. "How many?" Alexander finally asked. "Dozens," Davidson replied. "Maybe more." Richard slammed his hand on the counter, making the star cookies jump. "We were just pawns. Our whole lives, everything we built, was built on other people's pain," Alexander finished, just like Margaret said. Emma touched the star cookies gently, straightening them. "Mom used to say that broken things, when put back together, are stronger at the breaks." The adults looked at this child who had lost so much yet understood so much more. The bakery phone rang the hospital. Sarah answered, her face paling. "Margaret's numbers are dropping. The stress, the stop treatment, they're saying." She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. The fractures were deepening, threatening to swallow them all. Alexander looked around the bakery at his newfound brother, their adoptive mothers carrying 3 decades of guilt, Emma's quiet strength, Sarah and Grace's unwavering loyalty, at the star cookies and Christmas letters and evidence of loves lost and found. His phone buzzed one last time, a message from Margaret. "Remember what I taught you about bread, how it needs both pressure and rest, how it breaks down before it rises. Family is like that too." The fractures were deep, but maybe, just maybe, they could be the spaces where new love could grow. Richard seemed to read his thoughts. "We spent our lives competing, building empires designed to destroy each other. What if? What if we built something together instead?" Alexander finished. Emma held up 2 star cookies. "Grandma says broken cookies taste just as sweet. Maybe broken families can too." The brothers looked at their adoptive mothers, carrying their heavy folders of truth, at Davidson with his evidence of larger conspiracies, at the bakery that had become the epicenter of their shattered world. The fractures were there in their hearts, their histories, their understanding of family itself. But as Margaret had taught them, sometimes things need to break completely before they can be remade into something stronger, something truer, something built on love instead of lies. Now they just had to figure out how to rise from these fragments before it was too late for the woman who had loved them all along. The breaking came at midnight, as all significant things seemed to in this story. Margaret's condition deteriorated rapidly, the lack of treatment finally taking its devastating toll. The hospital called. "She's asking for both of them. Hurry." The bakery had become a command center of sorts, papers and evidence scattered across flour-dusted counters. But everything stopped with that call. "Go," Grace urged, gathering documents. "Sarah and I will keep working on the legal angles." Emma stood by the door, her small face tight with fear. "Can I?" "No, sweetheart," Sarah pulled her close. "Not tonight. Tonight's for them." The brothers drove through swirling snow, neither speaking. Their empires had crumbled, their identities shattered, their whole lives revealed as elaborate chess pieces in a game they'd never chosen to play. Alexander's phone rang. Elizabeth Hayes, her voice uncharacteristically emotional. "The senator, your father, he's agreed to confess. Everything. About all the families, all the separations. Catherine and I will testify too." "Why now?" Richard asked, loud enough for her to hear. "Because watching you both choose love over power made us realize we were the ones who were truly poor." The hospital corridors seemed endless. In the ICU, they found Margaret struggling for breath, her monitors painting a grim picture in green and red. "My boys," she whispered as they entered. "Both my beautiful boys." But they took positions on either side of her bed, these powerful men now reduced to what they truly were, sons, seeing their mother slip away. "I need," Margaret fought for air, "need to tell you." "Save your strength," Alexander pleaded. No, her voice found steel. You need to know. That night when they took you, I fought. I fought so hard they had to sedate me. But before they did, I made a promise. I promised I'd find you. Both of you. That love would find a way. Richard gripped her hand. We know. The letters. Not just letters, she gasped. Every year, on your birthday, I baked 2 cakes. One for each of you. Then I'd stand in the snow and set a star lantern free, praying it would guide you home. The brothers exchanged glances, memories surfacing. Alexander always feeling drawn to bakery windows. Richard a lifelong habit of following stars. The Senator Margaret continued, each word a battle. He came to me last week, offered millions to keep quiet. I told him all the money in the world couldn't buy what he'd stolen, a mother's love. Her monitors began to wail. Staff rushed in, but Margaret waved them back. Listen, she commanded her sons. Your empires, your fortunes, they were built on sand. But love is like bread. It needs time to rise, truth to make it whole. Alexander's phone buzzed. Emma had sent a video. In it, she stood in the bakery, surrounded by star cookies arranged in a perfect circle. Grandma, she said to the camera, remember what you taught me? About how stars align when lost souls find their way home. Well, I think they're aligning again. Because love is stronger than lies, and family is worth more than fortune, and sometimes the greatest power is in letting go of power itself. Margaret watched the video, tears falling. She understands. My granddaughter understands what took me a lifetime to learn. The monitors shrieked again. This time the medical team wouldn't be waved away. Out, a doctor ordered. Now. But Margaret held her son's hands with surprising strength. Promise me, she whispered. Promise you'll build something real. Something based on love, not power. Something worthy of the stars that brought you home. We promise, they said in unison, a harmony they'd never known they could create. As they were ushered out, Margaret's voice followed them. Remember, love rises, truth shines, and stars always find their way. The brothers stood in the corridor, their world breaking apart yet again. Through the window, snow began to fall, not star-shaped this time, but pure and cleansing. Alexander's phone lit up one last time. Grace, we found it. The evidence that could save everything. But using it means exposing everyone. Not just Sterling and Hayes, but all the families involved. All the lives broken. All the truths buried. But the brothers looked at each other, 35 years of engineered rivalry dissolving in the face of a greater truth. Well, Richard said quietly, she did tell us to build something real. Alexander nodded, touching his birthmark. Something worthy of the stars. Through the ICU window, they could see Margaret fighting for each breath, her strength, the strength that had sustained love through 35 years of silence, finally reaching its breaking point. But perhaps they realized some things need to break completely before they can be remade into something stronger, something truer, something built on love instead of lies. The revelation came in the coldest hour before dawn. As Margaret fought for her life in the ICU, Senator Sterling requested a meeting in the hospital chapel, a place of truth, he said, where no lies could stand. The brothers found him kneeling before the altar, looking older than his years. Snow fell silently outside stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across his face. I suppose, he began without turning, you want to know why? Why separate twins? Why destroy a mother's love? Why build empires on broken hearts? We're past wanting reasons, Alexander replied coldly. We're here for truth. The senator finally stood, facing his sons, one raised to destroy, one raised to conquer, both now united against him. The truth is, I was terrified of what Richard demanded. A young nurse? A mother's love. Of love itself, the senator's voice cracked. You see, there was another set of twins. Before you. My brothers. The chapel fell silent, except for the soft whisper of falling snow. Our father separated us too. One to politics, one to business. A perfect division of power, he laughed bitterly. My brother died thinking we were enemies. And I convinced myself it was necessary. That love was weakness. That power was the only truth worth having. Alexander touched his birthmark. So you repeated the pattern, used us as pawns. I perfected it, the senator corrected. Found other twins, other vulnerable mothers. Created a network of separated siblings, all raised to compete, to destroy too. And to what Richard interrupted. To prove love doesn't matter. To prove I was right. That power matters more than blood. That empire is stronger than family. He turned to the stained glass window, where colored light fractured the falling snow. But then I saw you both tonight, choosing love over everything we built. And I realized I've spent my life proving myself wrong. His phone buzzed a message with a photo attached. Opening it revealed a faded image, two boys with identical birthmarks, one in a business suit, one in military uniform, both smiling before life and lies tore them apart. Your uncle, the senator whispered, died thinking I hated him. The truth is, I loved him so much it terrified me, just like your mother's love terrified me. Love makes you vulnerable. Power makes you safe. No, Alexander said quietly. Power makes you alone. Richard stepped forward. Those other twins, the other families you destroyed. All part of a grand experiment. To prove love could be engineered, controlled, used as a weapon, the senator's laugh was hollow. Instead, I proved what your mother knew all along, that true love finds its way home, no matter how hard we try to stop it. Through the chapel windows they could see Margaret's ICU room, where Emma now sat reading Christmas letters aloud, her small voice carrying hope even as monitors beeped warnings. I'm confessing everything, the senator announced suddenly. Every family, every separation, every lie. Not for redemption, it's too late for that. But because he touched the old photo of his brother, because some truths need to be told before it's too late. As if in response, alarms began blaring from Margaret's room. Medical staff rushed past the chapel windows. Go, the senator urged. Go to your mother. Do what I never could, choose love before it's too late. As the brothers rushed out, he called after them, the stars on your wrists. They're not birthmarks. They're love's signature, marking souls meant to find their way home. They ran through hospital corridors as dawn began to break, leaving their father alone in the chapel with his ghosts and his truths and his too late wisdom about love's power over empire. Behind them, snow continued to fall, and in its quiet descent, perhaps there was both judgment and mercy, nature's own testimony to the truth that had finally found its voice. While doctors fought to stabilize Margaret, Emma revealed the final piece of truth she'd been holding close. From her backpack, she pulled out one last letter, not from her mother's diary or Margaret's collection, but something else entirely. I found this behind the bakery's old oven, she explained as the brothers huddled close. It's from the night you were born. The paper was yellowed, scorched at the edges, a letter that had survived fire, time, and silence. My precious sons, if you're reading this, the truth has finally come out. But there's something else you need to know. The night you were born wasn't just about the senator's plans or your father's weakness. I made a choice that night. They offered me millions to give you up, promised me a new life far away, but they also threatened if I kept you, they would make sure you both ended up in the worst parts of the system, separated not just from me but from each other. So I chose the hardest thing a mother could choose. I let them place you with powerful families, not for money, but because I knew someday you would be strong enough to find each other, strong enough to fight back. Every Christmas Eve, I baked bread with star anise not just for the shape, but because ancient sailors used stars to find their way home. I prayed my love would be your compass. The birthmarks you share aren't just random marks. The night you were born, I used the last of my strength to mark you both a tiny star, drawn with natural ink that became part of your skin. So you would know when you found each other that you were meant to be found. I didn't give you up. I set you free to become strong enough to return. All my love. Your mother. The hospital room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors. Margaret lay still, but her hand moved slightly, seeking her son's. She sacrificed everything, Richard whispered. Not just her happiness, but her reputation, her career. She sacrificed, Alexander added, but she never stopped fighting. Every loaf of bread, every star cookie was a beacon Emma finished. Like the star that led the wise men home. Margaret's eyes fluttered open. My clever boy, she managed, figured it out. Finally. The brothers moved to her bedside, one on each side, mirror images of power transformed by love. Why didn't you tell us, Alexander asked gently, about marking us, about choosing our families? Because Margaret's voice was faint but clear. You needed to choose love on your own, not from guilt, not from obligation, but because love is always a choice. Her monitors beeped a warning, but she continued. Your father chose power, the senator chose control. I chose love. And now you've chosen too. Emma climbed onto the bed, careful of the tubes and wires. And I chose you, Grandma, just like my mom chose to fight for truth. Margaret smiled weakly. The best choices are the ones that bring us home. The morning sun broke through the window, casting a warm glow across the room. Where it touched Margaret's worn hands, it created small star-shaped patterns, light reflecting truth, illuminating sacrifice. We understand now, Richard said softly, why the bakery meant so much. It wasn't just a business. It was a lighthouse, Alexander finished, guiding us home. Margaret's eyes shone with tears and triumph. Love rises, she whispered her favorite lesson. Like bread, like truth, like hope. Outside, the snow had stopped, and in the clear morning sky, one last star shone brilliantly, a final testament to a mother's love that had waited 35 years to bring her children home. The sacrifice had been enormous, the weight excruciating, but as Margaret had always known, some things were worth every moment of pain. Love, after all, like the best bread, only rises when you're brave enough to let it go. In the quiet hours of that hospital morning, as Margaret rested between waves of treatment, Emma finally shared her own carefully orchestrated truth. Standing at the foot of the bed, she pulled out a creased letter written in her mother's handwriting, dated just days before she died. My dearest Emma, when you read this, you'll understand why I spent my last days teaching you about stars and stories and the power of truth. You see, I wasn't just a nurse who witnessed injustice. I was part of Margaret's story all along. The night she marked her twins with stars, I was there, a young student nurse, watching in secret. Years later, when I returned to that same hospital, Margaret was my mentor. She never knew I had witnessed her moment of both triumph and tragedy. When I discovered I was dying, Margaret was the one who held my hand through every treatment they denied me. And when I investigated Sterling Industries practices, she was the one who helped me gather evidence, never knowing it would one day help her find her own sons. My precious daughter, I'm leaving you with Margaret not just because she's kind, but because you're meant to help bring her story full circle. The star cookies, the birth records, the hidden diaries, I've shown you where to find everything. Sometimes angels come in small packages, and sometimes the greatest heroes are little girls who believe in the power of love and truth. Guide them home, my brave girl. All my love, Mom. The room was silent as Emma's role in their reunion became clear. Every coincidence from her recognition of the birthmark to her perfect timing with evidence had been carefully planned by a dying mother and executed by her remarkable daughter. "You knew Alexander breathed? All along you knew who we were?" Emma nodded, her small face solemn. "Mom said timing matters when you're baking love back together. You have to let all the ingredients rise at just the right moment." Richard laughed softly, wonderingly. "So that's why you insisted on alphabetizing the attic?" "And why you started the star cookie tradition," Margaret added weakly from her bed, understanding dawning in her tired eyes. "Mom said stars are like truth. They look small from far away, but they're actually huge and powerful up close." Emma touched the temporary star on her wrist. "I wasn't sure when the right time would be, but then the snow started falling in stars and I knew." Alexander knelt before her. "You orchestrated everything. The evidence reveals the community support." "Mom called it Operation Rising Light," Emma smiled. "Like how bread rises and truth comes to light." Through the window, the morning sun created a perfect star pattern on the hospital floor, nature itself acknowledging this final piece of their story. "Your mother," Margaret whispered, tears flowing freely. "She saved us all. Through you." Emma climbed carefully onto the bed. She said sometimes the biggest love stories need the smallest helpers. That's why she made sure I ended up here with you. Because love is like baking. It needs someone to follow the recipe, to watch it rise, to make sure nothing burns. Richard touched his birthmark, then Emma's temporary star. "So we didn't just find each other by chance. We had our own guardian angel." "Two angels," Alexander corrected, looking at Emma with new understanding. "A mother brave enough to leave a map, and a daughter brave enough to follow it." Margaret reached for Emma's hand. "All this time, I thought I was saving you." "But I was helping save all of us," Emma finished. "Mom said that's how love works. Everybody saves everybody else." Outside, the city was awakening to a new day, unaware that in this quiet hospital room, the final piece of a 35-year puzzle had fallen into place. A little girl, armed with her mother's wisdom and her own pure heart, had helped orchestrate one of the greatest love stories their small town had ever known. Emma looked around at her assembled family, the twins she'd helped unite, the grandmother she'd helped save, the truth she'd helped reveal. "Mom was right about one more thing," she said softly. "Sometimes the smallest stars shine the brightest." And in that moment they all understood that their story had never just been about lost twins or corporate empires or even a mother's endless love. It had also been about a little girl who believed enough in the power of truth and love to help the stars align. Dawn broke over Millbrook 1 week later, painting the sky in shades of hope. Margaret's bakery, once threatened with demolition, now hummed with new life as volunteers helped transform it into something greater than anyone had imagined. Alexander and Richard, no longer corporate rivals but unified brothers, stood surveying the changes. The old counter where Emma had first noticed their birthmarks remained, but around it the space had evolved. One wall now featured memorial photographs and stories of families separated by power and greed, their truths finally seeing light. The senator's confession changed everything. Richard observed, watching workers install new ovens. 43 sets of twins, all separated for corporate gain. 43 families we can help reunite, Alexander corrected, adjusting blueprints for the bakery's expansion. The plan showed not just a business, but a healing center, part bakery, part gathering space, part resource hub for separated families seeking reconnection. Margaret, still weak but responding well to the treatment they'd finally secured, sat in her favorite chair directing traffic. Her recipe books lay open around her, but now they contained more than just baking instructions. They held the stories of every family they were helping, every truth being uncovered. "The bread needs to rise another 10 minutes, she called to Sarah, who was training new staff, all children of separated families, all part of their growing movement for truth and reconciliation. Emma darted between helpers, her star-shaped cookie cutters now famous across social media as symbols of hope. "Look," she exclaimed, holding up her tablet. 3 more families matched through the database. The database had been Grace's idea, combining birth records, hospital files, and the senator's confessions to create a way for separated siblings to find each other. Already, it had facilitated dozens of reunions. "Your mother would be so proud," Margaret told Emma softly, touching the little girl's temporary star that she still faithfully reapplied each morning. Elizabeth and Catherine arrived, carrying boxes of documents from their own archives. Their role in the cover-up had cost them their social standing, but as Catherine had observed, sometimes you have to lose status to gain soul. The bell above the door chimed as Davidson entered with the morning's news. Sterling Industries and Hayes International were being reformed under a new banner, Starlight Foundation, dedicated to healing the wounds their original incarnations had caused. "The first grant is approved," he announced. "Full funding for the Children's Hospital Project, with a special wing for families affected by medical discrimination." Alexander and Richard exchanged glances, their matching birthmarks catching the morning light. They'd lost their empires but gained something far more valuable, a chance to transform their inherited legacy of division into a future built on reunion. "The bread's ready," Sarah called from the kitchen, and everyone paused to inhale the familiar scent of Margaret's recipe. But now it carried new meaning. Each loaf was both sustenance and symbol, a reminder that love, like bread, required both patience and labor to rise. Margaret watched her sons work side by side, their former rivalry transformed into powerful collaboration. They'd lost everything society deemed valuable, but in that loss they'd found their true inheritance, the strength that comes from choosing love over power, truth over profit, healing over harm. Emma climbed onto a chair to hang one last photograph, her mother in her nurse's uniform, standing proud outside the hospital where this story began. Below it, she placed the diary that had helped spark their revolution of truth. "Mom said sometimes the best endings are really new beginnings," she announced with childlike wisdom. The morning sun streamed through windows still marked with the ghost of star snow, casting light on their gathered family, biological and chosen, broken and healed, lost and found. They had all lost something to reach this moment: fortunes, reputations, illusions of power. But in those losses they'd gained the one thing money couldn't buy and power couldn't protect: the simple, profound truth that love, when given room to rise, can transform any wound into a wellspring of healing. The grand reopening of Margaret's Bakery, now Stars Align, a place of rising, took place on a crisp winter morning exactly 1 year after the fateful Christmas Eve that had changed everything. Snow fell gently, but this time there was no need for star-shaped miracles. The real miracle was in the gathering itself. The space had been transformed, yet remained fundamentally true to its origins. The original counter where Emma had first spotted Alexander's birthmark was now the centerpiece of a circular design, representing the endless nature of love and truth. Around it, different stations told different stories. The bread rising station, where Margaret, now in full remission, taught both baking and healing to other families torn apart by power and greed. Bread is like truth, she would say, kneading dough with hands that had written 35 years of letters. It needs time, patience, and loving hands to rise properly. The Star Cookie Corner, Emma's domain, where she helped children of separated families decorate cookies while sharing their stories. Each star shape now carried special meaning, patterns developed to help siblings recognize each other across time and distance. The Truth Library, Richard's contribution, housing records, documents, and resources for families searching for their lost ones. The senator's full confession occupied a special place, not as a testament to power's corruption, but as proof that truth eventually finds its way to light. The Healing Hub, Alexander's vision, where medical professionals volunteered to help families denied care by profit-driven systems. The Children's Hospital Project, now fully funded through the Starlight Foundation, had partnered with them to ensure no family would be torn apart by medical costs again. Sarah and Grace managed the day-to-day operations, turning Margaret's recipes into instruments of healing. Each loaf of bread, each star cookie became part of a larger recipe for redemption. "Look who's here," Emma called out, as another family entered, twins separated at birth, reuniting for the first time. Their matching birthmarks, different from the brothers' stars but equally meaningful, testified to another mother's love finding its way home. Elizabeth and Catherine had found their own redemption, using their social connections to help locate more separated families. Sometimes Elizabeth observed, watching the twins embrace, "The greatest wealth is in the healing we enable." Davidson, now head of the Starlight Foundation's investigative unit, arrived with more files, more stories, more chances for healing. 3 more matches confirmed, he reported, and the database keeps growing. The brothers stood together, watching their mother guide another parent through the process of healing and hope. They'd lost their corporate empires but gained something far more valuable, a chance to build something real, something based on love rather than power. "You know," Richard mused, "for all his faults, the senator was right about one thing: power does matter, just not the kind he thought." Alexander nodded, understanding. The power of truth, of love, of rising. Emma darted past with a fresh batch of star cookies, her temporary birthmark now accompanied by a small baker's hat. "Don't forget the power of cookies," she called over her shoulder, making them laugh. Margaret joined them. Her strength returned not just from successful treatment, but from the daily miracle of watching love heal what power had broken. "When I wrote those letters," she said softly, "I never imagined they'd help heal so many other families too." Through the windows, snow continued to fall on Millbrook, no longer a town divided by wealth and status but united in purpose. The old fountain where Alexander had first stood now flowed with heated water, never freezing, symbolic of the warmth that had transformed their community. Above the door, a new sign glowed softly, where stars align and love rises below it. In smaller letters, "Every family deserves to rise. Every truth deserves to shine. Every love deserves to find its way home." It wasn't just a bakery anymore. It wasn't just a story of lost twins and a mother's love. It had become something more, a beacon for all those still searching, still hoping, still believing in the power of love to rise above all else. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the stars first aligned, Margaret's bakery glowed like a lighthouse in the winter night. Inside, an extraordinary gathering was taking place, not just of their immediate family, but of all the families they'd helped reunite throughout the year. The space was transformed by hundreds of floating star lanterns, each representing a family brought back together. The air was rich with the scent of Margaret's special Christmas bread, baked with star anise just as she had done for 35 lonely years. Emma, wearing a dress decorated with silver stars, stood at the center of the room, addressing the gathered crowd. "My mom used to say that some stars take years to reach us, but their light never stops traveling. Like the love in this room, it took time to find its way, but it never stopped shining." Around her, the evidence of that truth was everywhere. Reunited twins sharing their first Christmas together. Parents embracing children they'd thought lost forever. The senator, humbled and aging, watching his sons lead a revolution of love. Elizabeth and Catherine, their social rivalry transformed into a partnership for healing. Sarah and Grace, turning business skills into tools for reunion. Davidson, whose investigative talents now served love instead of power. Margaret sat in her special chair, her cancer in remission, watching her sons arrange the evening surprise. Alexander and Richard had spent months preparing for this moment, gathering stories, collecting photographs, weaving together threads of love that power had tried to break. "Ready?" Alexander asked his brother. Richard nodded, touching his birthmark. "It's time." The lights dimmed, and on the bakery's walls, images began to appear, projected stories of every family they'd helped reunite. Each tale was unique, yet all were connected by the same thread of love refusing to be denied. Then came their own story: Margaret's letters, Emma's mother's diary, the senator's confession, all woven together with pictures of star-shaped snow and cookies and the birthmarks that had started it all. But the final image was new, a photograph they'd discovered just that morning in the bakery's oldest recipe book. It showed a young Margaret on the night they were born, holding both babies for just a moment before they were taken away. On each infant's wrist, she was carefully drawing a tiny star with ink made from herbs, a mark of love that would last a lifetime. "I choose love," her voice from the past echoed through the years. "No matter how long it takes, love will find a way home." Emma stepped forward again, holding something precious, a book bound in starry paper. "This is our gift to everyone," she announced. "Not just the story of two brothers finding their way home, but a guide for every family still searching. Because love is like stars, it shows others the way." The book's title glowed softly: "Rising Stars, a Recipe for Finding Home." As midnight approached, Margaret stood with her sons on either side, Emma before them. Outside, snow began to fall, and there, among the ordinary flakes, were a few perfect stars, as if nature itself was celebrating with them. "Look," Emma whispered, "the stars are aligning again." But this time, they all understood the true alignment wasn't in the snow or the stars or even the birthmarks they shared. It was in the choice they'd made, the choice Margaret had made 35 years ago, to believe that love, like the best bread, would rise in its own time. The clock struck midnight, and as Christmas Eve became Christmas Day, hundreds of voices joined in song, not just carols, but a celebration of love's triumph over power, truth's victory over lies, hope's persistence over despair. Margaret looked around at her transformed bakery, no longer just a place of business, but a beacon of hope for all those still searching for their way home. Her sons, once raised to destroy each other, now stood united in love's purpose. Emma, wise beyond her years, carried her mother's legacy of truth and courage forward. And there, in that moment, as stars snow fell and love rose like the finest bread, they all understood the final truth, that some stories don't really end, they just keep rising, keep shining, keep guiding others home. For in the end, love, like stars, knows no boundaries. It simply lights the way, one heart at a time, until everyone finds their way back to where they belong. The end. Dear friends, if this story touched your heart and made you believe in the power of love and redemption, please consider joining our storytelling family. Like Margaret's letters that waited 35 years to find their way home, your support helps our stories reach those who need them most. Subscribe to our channel, share this tale with loved ones, and let us know in the comments how it resonated with you. Every like, share, and comment helps us continue creating stories that remind us all that love, like the finest bread, rises best when shared. Together, let's keep spreading hope, one story at a time.